opportunity. It's wonderful to have you here. And it's really hard to introduce you, sir, because when I talked long and hard about it, it's really difficult to put things in perspective with you. The best thing I could come up with is you are F-35 and B-52 combined. The speed, precision, and the magnitude of factual carpet bombing that you do is wonderful. So let me get right onto it. Everybody knows about your achievements, and God only knows there are so many. Uh, what are your failures in life? I really want to
Failure.
know. Yes, sir.
Take a look at the world around you. That's my failures. I've been spending my life trying to make it much better than it is, and small successes, but many failures.
So you take the blame for those ones. Why do you do that? It's beyond your
Sorry.
control. Do you take the blame for these failures? Why do you do that? It's not in your control.
You can always do more, do it better. Uh, the gap between what should be achieved and what has been achieved is very large.
Yes. So this another topic is kind of difficult. Uh, what do you think about death often? And what's your perspective on that as an event? And it kind of keeps me up at night.
I used to think about it when I was a teenager, but I realized that there's nothing to think about. It's dust to dust. We live the lives we can in between, and I don't think about it anymore.
So on the other hand, we got this one world where we have infinitesimal subatomic to celestial level and everything in between, and all the different arrangements of matter and the intermingling between these arrangements. And then there's this another world where we have this constant battle going on between good and evil, very subjective, of course, and all the emotions and the games we play with each other and all the will to survive and thrive and justify our existence. So this ball of complexity wrapped in extremely simple things. So let me ask you this very cliched but extremely fundamental question: what do you think is life?
What do I think is life?
Yes, sir.
It's the answer to that is the matter that we all know better than anything else. We're experiencing it. This is life. We have a period in which we'll have it. We can make the most of it that we can. That's it. No point speculating about anything else.
It's that simple, eh? So do you agree with the notion that good men are the ones who are dangerous and then they control their monster and then they are good by choice, or on the contrary to being harmless? Harmless is a dangerous virtue, they say. Do you agree with that?
Sorry, say it again.
So do you agree with the notion that good men are the men who are dangerous and then they control their monster and they are good by choice, and on the contrary being harmless is a very bad virtue?
We have a conception of what's right and what's wrong at a rather fundamental level. Most of us share that concept. When it comes to concrete situations, we will differ on our evaluation of what is the way to achieve the common good. But all we can do is work through that, discuss it with others, try to interact and see if we can reach common ground and move on from there. That's life.
So now we have these so-called motivational speakers slash intellectuals slash whatever, preaching about killing the ego. And in my opinion and so many others, you end up being docile, weak, and non-assertive personnel. Do you think it's a good idea to kill the ego to move forward in this world?
Do I think it's a good idea to what?
To kill the ego to
Kill
move?
evil?
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea to overcome the evil. That doesn't mean kill it. It means moving to achieve what you can, to expand what's good, to reduce what's evil.
I mean ego, like ego, ego, to kill the ego.
How do you kill? You kill it.
I don't know. People are preaching that. Is
I
it
don't.
possible?
I don't listen to people who are preaching. I'm interested in dealing with the problems that exist in the best way that we can. So they're very serious problems. Some of them existential problems, like will organized human society survive after the next few decades? It's a pretty serious question. We do what we can to try to ameliorate the situation, move on to a more hopeful world. I don't think talk about killing evil offers any help in this project.
So, s- what do you think about to what extent we should go about in pursuit of truth? Is it a good idea to mess up your social circle in pursuit of your beliefs?
Is it a good idea? I'm sorry.
Is it a good idea to mess up your social circle in pursuit of your beliefs? To what extent we should go in pursuit of truth?
You should always go in pursuit of truth in the broadest circles that you can reach. It's not much point sticking to your own social circle. You have to reach out, try to convince others, try to interact with them, to find ways of moving forward with them to the extent possible. Maybe you can learn something from them, they can learn something from you.
Okay. So, the next thing is we hear these mind boggling stories about uh, fathers raping their daughters and mothers slaughtering their kids and whatnot. I don't know if they're happening more often or coming to light because of social media more frequently, but and makes you wonder if we are intrinsically capable of such evil, atrocious acts. What do you think? Are we any closer to knowing what is or isn't intrinsic to human beings?
I think we're over long periods of time, we're coming closer. So if you go back to the 18th century, uh, practices that were considered normal and acceptable would be considered so outrageous today that you can't even think about them. And we don't have to go that far back. Go back, say, to the 1960s. There were practices then that seem intolerable now because our conception of what's right, our moral sense has expanded. So a lot that was done then would not even be thinkable now. And this happens constantly. It's not a steady line forward. There is regression, but over long periods of time, I think we can agree with Martin Luther King that the arc of moral understanding does move forward slowly with regression.
Okay. Is and is a preliminary question. Is the law of the land is what's keeping us civil, and without it, we are just rugged animals?
That's the Hobbesian view, but I think it's rather different. The law of the land makes no difference unless people internalize what's right about it and oppose what's wrong about it. And take a look at Stalin's constitution. That was the law of the land. Very pretty phrases. Had almost nothing to do with what was happening to people in their lives. The law is what we make of it. sometimes overturning it, sometimes living up to it.
So I heard somewhere you talked about the problem of consciousness and pre-conscious decisions, and you said that consciousness is relatively shallower of a problem than pre-conscious decision is a much more deeper problem. Isn't it subjective? Why do you think pre-conscious decision making is a bigger problem?
Are you asking about the problem of understanding it or the problem of living with it?
Understanding.
There's some understanding, but it's a very difficult topic to investigate. We have, by definition, no conscious access to pre-conscious, unconscious mental acts. So we have to study them the way we study other things that we have no conscious insight into. The nature of organic molecules, the nature of light, the way in which our immune system functions. We don't have any conscious insight into any of these things, but we can learn about them by the methods of science, of rational inquiry. We can gain some understanding of them. So, in the case of my own major interest, language and human language and thought, we have no conscious insight into the way they're functioning in our minds, but we have learned a fair amount about them by looking at the phenomena that we can investigate. That's the way science proceeds. There's a famous comment by a Nobel laureate physicist in his Nobel address, in which he says the main thrust of science is to find the simple invisibles that lie behind and account for the complex visibles. That's the search for understanding. And it's been going on for millennia. We make some progress on it all the time. So we understand a lot more now than was understood 25 years ago.
So
I,
this, yeah.
I can continue. I was doing some work this morning, which, if it works out, will advance understanding a little bit further into the simple invisibles. That's our inquiry into nature. Starts when we're young children who are very inquisitive, want to understand. And for many of us, it can and should proceed all through our lives, learning and understanding more.
Okay. So this pre-conscious decision, the parts of brain that gets activated before the conscious act, does it open the gateway to divine intervention for religious folks? The master puppeteer, like a lot of scientific community calls it, and you too.
Well, if people like to have religious beliefs, it's their business. As long as they don't interfere with others, it's no one else's concern. But it gives us no insight or understanding into these questions, not as far as I can see.
So the next topic I want to go to is psychedelics. This was a taboo topic, but for the last decade it came to light and it's getting more traction. You know, Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory. Do you think he is onto something or just swinging in the dark? That it played a vital role in evolution of human brain, psychedelics.
Sorry, I didn't grasp it.
So this for the last decade, this stoned ape theory, Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory, that magic mushroom played a vital role in the development of human brain. Do you think he is on to something or just swinging in the dark?
Who are you referring to?
Terence McKenna. the guy who did a lot of research on magic mushrooms and psychedelics.
Psychedelics.
Yes, sir.
Well, I haven't looked into it in any detail, but what I've seen uh, does not seem to me very insightful or illuminating. I don't think that's the way to study what the brain is doing. The brain sciences have made slow progress. It's a very difficult subject. We cannot, we can learn a fair amount about the uh, brain functions of animals where we allow ourselves, rightly or wrongly, to do invasive experiments. But we can't do that with humans for ethical reasons. And maybe we even shouldn't do it for other organisms. But because of those barriers, means you have to study human mental acts very much from the outside without performing the kinds of experiments that you can easily imagine that might answer lots of questions. So,
With this ethical barrier in between the scientific research, what is the way forward?
well, the way forward is to use the means that we have. So we can, there are, for example, imaging techniques which are improving, which allow non invasive information about parts of the brain, how they're functioning under when you're carrying out particular activities, when you're thinking about particular things. Uh, they give us some information about how the brain is functioning when we carry out certain kinds of mental acts. So, for example, some interesting things have been found about how the brain functions when we, uh, in the case of language, when we are dealing with invented languages that conform to the principles of actual language, as distinct from invented languages which follow principles that human language never adheres to. Turns out the brain operates differently in those cases in interesting ways. That gives us some insight into what the brain is doing when we're carrying out the kind of activities that you and I are engaged in now. There's work of that kind. There are serious questions about the most fundamental matters about how the brain functions, like how we have a huge amount stored in memory. You have probably 60 or 70,000 words stored in memory, which you can access very quickly. A lot more about the world stored in memory. Where is it? How is it organized? How can you access it? On those topics, there are a lot of mysteries, but some insight being developed. It's been found recently, for example, that single cells in the particular part of the brain, the hippocampus, may be storing uh, considerable memories. That's new research, which tells us something, which, if it works out, tells us something about what the nature of memory may be. Maybe not in neural nets, but internal to individual cells, which offers lots of possibilities for research. One outstanding cognitive neuroscientist who's been working on this for many years is C.R. Gallistel. Much of that work is now coming to fruition, I think. So there are lots of ways to study these questions, but it's hard. Science isn't easy. If it was easy, we'd know everything. I mean, take, say, physics. You can pick up a current journal of quantum theory, advanced quantum theory, with saw one recently in which a group of leading scientists are in a discussion trying to see if they can reach some consensus on what a particle is. the most fundamental entity, a particle. What is it? Lots of uh, mystery, uh, lack of understanding, differences of opinion, even about such a fundamental matter. When we turn to how the uh, brain, the human brain, is able to accomplish the kinds of activities, again, that you and I are engaged in now, it's going to be a long time before we understand much about that. Fundamental ideas still haven't been discovered. They're waiting to be discovered. The challenge is very exciting, but enormous.
So the enteric brain or enteric nervous system, this other part of brain, uh, do you think there's some serious work being done on this side? Because it's fairly recent, I guess.
On the enteric nervous system,
Yes, sir.
well, it's not the field of my personal concentration, but what I read about it secondhand is that things are being learned. If for people who don't know what this is, we basically have two brains. There's one that's in the head. There's the other that's informally called the gut brain, the brain that's located internal to the body, the somatic system, which controls much of the way our body functions in life. It's something it runs the entire body. It's a complex nervous system, has huge number of neurons, rather similar in some ways to uh, uh, the nervous system that's functioning up here. It has some of the similar diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, seems to have a large part of the same structure. Of course, we have no conscious insight into it at all. It's just working and functioning all the time. The only time we know about it is if something goes wrong. You have a stomach ache, let's say, or something worse, then we find out something about it. But as far as I know, uh, research continues into the nature of this system as well. I can't tell you about it. I don't study the advanced research.
Okay. So the way of explaining things to other people, for example, let's say planting a seed and growing a tree, bearing the fruit, is akin to having friendship and relationships. You water it and then it comes to fruition. So the only way to explain stuff, is it just in relation to stuff, or we are just bound by our language to explain things in their reality?
Well, it's one of the great experiences of life, which I've enjoyed all through my life, is doing just what you mentioned, taking a small tree, preparing the ground, uh, putting compost in, uh, placing it carefully, watering it, taking care of it year after year, and seeing this marvelous thing develop. The home where I lived for 50 years, I did a great deal of gardening. There were trees 50 feet high, plants, uh, 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 flowering plants, all sorts of things. I finally had to leave. I was just too old to live there alone anymore. The house was sold. To my great distress, bulldozers came, destroyed everything, everything, and put up a very ugly mansion on top of what had been a flowering, for me, personal paradise. Well, that happens. You move on.
Okay. So the next thing is, at this age and living your entire life, do you think, is there anything, we know there's nothing constant in the physical world, but in the spiritual world, there's any ideology that people can subscribe to live a relatively better lifestyle?
There are some truisms. which are often expressed in very inflated ways, but I think they're simple and we all know them. Uh, there are principles about how to live a decent life. The hard problem is applying them in existing concrete circumstances. What do we do about the particular issues that rightly engage us? So take me. I'm now living in Tucson, Arizona, not very far from the Mexican border. Uh, Between me and the Mexican border, there's extremely harsh desert, brutal, harsh desert. People are dying there. They've been driven there because the United States, starting with Clinton, closed off all of the relatively easy points of access for people pleading for asylum, as they're entitled to do under international law, mostly people fleeing from the destruction of their countries for which we are responsible. They're fleeing in desperation. They're driven from places where they could appeal for the asylum they are entitled to, driven into brutal, harsh deserts where border guards harass them. Uh, People try to help them, leaving bottles of water, destroyed by border guards, uh, corpses left in the desert. Well, that's a problem that's pretty close at hand. There are other problems that are more remote all over the world. A lot of my own interests and engagement have been all over the world. Uh, Southeast Asia, Central America, Middle East, anywhere, Southern India, anywhere you can imagine. And then there are problems that we all face, all, whether we like it or not. Is organized human society going to survive? Yesterday, there were fierce tornadoes which killed dozens of people. Nobody can say what the exact cause was, but we know that the general cause for increasingly harsh and destructive weather events is the heating of the environment, which is leading to enormous problems. If current tendencies persist, places like all of South Asia will be almost uninhabitable. Large parts of the Middle East will be uninhabitable. The problems faced in the richer countries, which are severe, will be very mild in comparison. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of people will be fleeing from disaster. The areas of the earth that will be habitable will be shrinking. Meanwhile, we're destroying huge numbers of other species, wantonly destroying them. The insect population is being radically reduced. All of life depends on it for survival, including us. Well, we know how to deal with these problems. Are we doing it? No. Let's take something even more immediate and simple. Take the Omicron mutation, which is now spreading. Can't be certain, but it's very likely, highly likely, that could have been prevented if the rich countries had not monopolized vaccines for themselves and insisted that the super rich pharmaceutical corporations should have the right to preserve their own control over the processes for making vaccines instead of allowing the pharmaceutical industry in South Africa to produce the vaccines. If they had, it's quite possible we'd be spared the latest phase of this disaster. Well, these are things we certainly know how to do. We're not doing them. A couple of weeks ago in Glasgow, there was a major conference, COP26, international conference on what to do with the growing severe crisis of heating the planet. There were actually two events going on. One was inside the halls where the ladies and gentlemen were soberly debating how not to do anything. The major decision they made was to meet next year and see if you can think of doing anything. Meanwhile, the earth burns and we move closer towards disaster. There was another event outside in the streets. Tens of thousands of people, mostly young people, were demanding that those with the power and authority use the means that are available, that we know, to overcome the crisis, to move on to a better world. Well, how that conflict will be resolved will determine whether there's anything else to talk about. So there are a range of problems, some of them nearby, some of them existential, some of them in other countries. And we can do what we can to try to ameliorate them, overcome them. We know many ways we know how to do it, so let's move forward. That's what matters, not general theses expressed in complex words and inflated rhetoric about good and evil. Let's work on what has to be done.
One last question, sir. Knowing what you know now and achieving what you achieved and living the life the way you did, what advice you would give to 30-year-old Noam Chomsky?
Keep an open mind, be willing to challenge or at least to question perceived dogma when it seems subject to question. Dedicate yourself to what you know in your heart is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's such an honor to have you here with me. And God bless you.
Thank
Live a
you.
wonderful life. Thank you. Bye bye.
Pleasure to talk to you.